That was like the best sitting I've had in a while. So I really am grateful for, it's one of the things about breath meditation is that concentration develops if you're proactive, and being proactive means that you're using your mind, which means that you're using what we call internal fabrication. So you're guiding yourself. So the best meditation that you can do is really one in which you're guiding yourself through the meditation, and partly for the reasons that I said before, because everybody's journey is going to be different. And I learned that years ago, because what I found was the best meditations that I would ever have were the ones that I was talking in the class when I was leading the class. And you wouldn't think, wow, he's leading the class, he's got to pay attention to everybody. But because I was guiding through the meditation, my meditations were always so much stronger. I was being proactive. So meditation is a proactive process. Developing concentration is a proactive process that includes insight. So the Buddha said that there's no concentration without insight, and there's no insight without concentration. I think we typically think, well, we understand that insight comes when concentration is developed, which is true, but in order to develop concentration, you also have to use insight and cultivate insight. The quote from the Dhammapada is, there's no jhana for one with no discernment for one with no jhana, but with one with both jhana and discernment, he or she is on the verge of unbinding. So jhana is the Buddha's concentration. So there's no jhana for one with no discernment for one with no jhana. So they work together, right? They work together. Concentration is deepened through using insight. The stronger the concentration is, the greater the insight is going to be. And one of the things that's interesting, of course, about concentration and insight is the skill that we use to develop both of them is the same. It's mindfulness. So, this is another area where there's some confusion because people tend to equate mindfulness with insight, but really the Buddha taught mindfulness of the body and the breath as a way of developing concentration. And then mindfulness of the mind and the way the body feels and the different aspects, the different dharmas, the different aspects of mind in the service of developing insight. But concentration, mindfulness is used, it's a skill that we use to develop concentration and insight. So that's something it's very important to understand, because the word mindfulness tends to be used just more in terms of insight or mindfulness of emotions, but really it begins with mindfulness of the body and the breath. So when we talk about concentration, we're talking, as I just said, about a very specific kind of concentration. So in Theravada Buddhism, what the Buddha taught in terms of concentration, there's different kinds of concentration. Before I learned insight meditation in the Theravada tradition, I practiced transcendental meditation. It was a different kind of concentration. The Buddha's concentration is known as jhana. So it's a very specific kind of concentration. And that's really important to understand, and I'll kind of go into that. But in order to develop jhana, you really have to use insight. So we develop concentration, we develop jhana by practicing mindfulness, specifically mindfulness of the body, and that begins with mindfulness of the breath. So this is what we just practiced. That's kind of the process that I just kind of took you through over that half-hour meditation. Mindfulness of the breath, anapanasati. Sati, mindfulness, pana, in-breath, ana, out-breath. Mindfulness of in and out breathing. So we practice mindfulness of breathing, anapanasati, so that we can develop jhana, and jhana is strong concentration. So this is one of the really important things to understand about the Buddha's teaching, is that the concentration that we're asked to develop is strong concentration. It's a form of very strong concentration. But there's also a misconception. I always figure my job as a teacher is to clear up a lot of misconceptions. A lot of times people have heard this idea and understand that the Buddha's concentration is jhana, but they think it's something that is really only for a select few, and that you have to go through some kind of extremely rigorous process of seclusion in order to develop jhana, which is absolutely not true. The Buddha taught jhana to householders. The Buddha taught jhana to people just like me and you, and was very clear about the fact that they could develop it. So jhana is strong concentration that everybody can develop. Everybody can develop. Now, you know, it requires effort. It requires effort to develop it, but not like some kind of extraordinary, maybe it is extraordinary because most people aren't doing it, but again, you can be a householder, a layperson, and develop jhana. I taught this practice in New York City, you know, for many, many years. Some people are here who were in our classes there. I had one student who became a monk. I had one other student who went on to live at a monastery. She's still there. The monk is still there, but that's out of, you know, hundreds of students. Most of the students that I taught over the years were householders with jobs. A lot of them had families and kids and parents that they were taking care of. They had busy lives, and they were able to develop strong concentration by making a good amount of effort, but mostly in a daily sitting practice, a retreat here or there, but also learning a very specific skill. Really, the key to learning, to developing jhana, is that you understand what the skill is and you're practicing the skill. The skill is very specific. It requires developing certain elements. Really, we went through the basic elements in this sitting just tonight, but it requires learning a particular skill and practicing that skill and putting some effort into that. So the thing about developing strong concentration and the thing about developing jhana is that you're not going to develop strong concentration and and you're not going to be able to achieve jhana by simply forcing the attention onto the meditation object, right? So a lot of concentration practices are just about forcing your attention on the object, right? I'm going to be mindful of the breath, and that's it. You know, I'm going to force my attention onto the breath and keep my attention there. That's kind of the first step, right? Put your attention on the breath, use directed thought, remind yourself to stay there. We're pretty proactive in that process, but we're not going to achieve strong concentration by simply forcing the attention onto the object, onto the breath. It's only going to take you so far. It's only going to take you so far. In order to be able to get the mind to stay with the breath, you have to develop insight. The mind has to have insight into the benefits of staying on the breath. You know, it's like with, similar to with an unskillful mental quality, like let's say anger, right? You can't give up anger simply by telling yourself to give up anger. Right? At least within the confines of the Buddha's teaching, you can't say to yourself, anger is really not so good. I really shouldn't, you know, be angry. I'm not going to be angry anymore, right? That doesn't really work. We develop an ability to let go of anger by bringing insight to the anger, looking at it, paying close attention to it, and understanding the drawbacks in it and the benefits of refraining from it. So we learn to let go of anger through insight, not by just sheer will. So it's the same with concentration. Your ability to develop concentration is only going to take you, is going to really depend on insight. You can only go so far with sheer will. You can only go so far with sheer will. And I didn't understand that. You know, so for years I really tried. I mean, I'm a person who tries really hard, you know, and, you know, I mean, a lot of my trying wasn't very skillful over the years, but until I really learned how to bring insight to the practice, I wasn't able to develop strong concentration through just sheer will. So in this practice of mindfulness of breathing that the Buddha teaches, the first step is to put the mind on the breath. And there it is pretty much of an act of will. We're saying to ourselves, okay, focus on the breath, stay with the breath. But the mind won't stay there. The mind won't stay there. The mind doesn't want to be there. The mind doesn't want to be on the breath. The mind doesn't want to be in the body. The mind doesn't want to be in the present moment. The mind doesn't want to be in the present moment. I could explain why that is. I could do 3 or 4 more Dharma talks on that. We have to kind of learn to understand and see that for ourselves. But if you think about, I am going to explain it a little bit because I don't want to leave you guys hanging. The mind doesn't want to stay in the present moment because the mind doesn't want to be in the body. What does it mean to be present? It means we're focused on the body. The mind doesn't want to be in the body because the mind considers the body inhospitable terrain. There's pain in the body. Why do I want to be in a place that's painful? There's physical pain, there's emotional pain, there's psychological pain, there's the deep karmic pain of all the different traumas, small and large, that we've been carrying with ourselves all of our lives. Those 4 rivers filled, those 4 oceans filled with tears, the lifetime and lifetimes of suffering that we hold in the body. So the mind doesn't want to be there. The mind doesn't want to be there. So, just to say them to the mind, you're going to stay with the breath and you're going to stay with the body, is only going to take us so far. So in order to be able to stay in the body, we have to start to develop insight. So the first insight, or one of the first insights, and there's several different layers and pieces to this, so I'm just going to go over some of these basics tonight, and I went through them in the sitting. The first, one of the most important basics in terms of developing insight, the kind of insight that we have to develop so that the mind will stay in the body, is seeing that the mind is throwing up obstacles. Okay? So it's really seeing that the mind doesn't want to be present. The mind is avoiding being present. The Buddha said the mind avoids being present in 5 ways. He called those the 5 hindrances. Desire, I want to get something to eat. I don't want to be present. Aversion, I don't like being present. Restlessness, dullness, and doubt. So the 2 that are the most primary in terms of what the mind is doing so that it won't be present are the restless mind and the dull mind, because those are states that the mind engenders as a way of getting out of the present moment. They're states that are rooted in delusion. So in its effort not to want to be present, the mind will engender lots of thoughts. That's the restless mind. So the mind is just thinking about anything it can possibly think of so it doesn't have to be present. So you're thinking about what happened yesterday and what happened 10 years ago and what you're going to do 5 years from now. And all these, it can be so many different little trivial, all different kinds of things that the mind is doing just so that it won't be present. And that's its purpose. The purpose of the restless mind is just to delude you out of the present moment. And the dull mind is the same thing. It's just the opposite, the other side of that coin. That's the mind that says, I don't want to be present. I'm just going to fall asleep. I'm just going to fall asleep. So these deluded states are states that we need to begin to start to recognize. We need to start to see that we're avoiding the present moment. And really start to see that this is what's going on. Because our tendency might be, well, I'm just tired. So that's what the mind wants you to believe. Or, I got a lot on my mind, so I'm really thinking about a lot of stuff. But what's really happening there, and this is really the crux of the 5 hindrances, is to see that the mind is going off into all these thoughts, or the mind is falling asleep, and to understand what it's doing is avoiding the present moment. Now you see what the mind is up to. Once you see what the mind is up to, you're starting to get some insight. Oh, I see what you're doing. That's when the Buddha saw Mara. Oh, I see you, Mara. I see what you're up to. So now you're starting to see what the mind is doing, and you're starting to say, you know what? I think I can be present here. I can see that you're trying to pull me out of the present moment, and that's what's going on. and I can see and I can begin to start to understand the drawbacks in that it's really important that I be present. I really want to be present here. This is really, important to me to be in the present moment so that I can be in the heart, so that I can find happiness in this life. So, that's really what's kind of happening when you're falling asleep or when you're going into those thoughts. The mind is taking you away from where you need to be so that you can move towards a greater happiness in your life. That's the insight. That's the insight. That's moving from I'm tired to this is what the mind is doing. This is what Mara is doing. So just beginning to start to see that. Once I started to see that, it was no, I'm going to stay present. And I can stay present. I'm not that tired. Yeah, maybe I'm a little tired, but I can stay present. So we begin to develop this insight into seeing that we're avoiding the present moment. It's something that we're doing. It's something that we're doing. We're allowing ourselves to fall asleep, or we're allowing ourselves to go into these states. So we see this and we start to understand that it's something that we can refrain from doing that. We start to see that it's something that I thought, well, I'm just dull and sleepy. I can open my eyes, I can stand, I can run around the block, but it's really out of my hands because I'm really tired, but what I began to see was that I could just give up those dull states. I didn't have to go into those dull states. Those are states that I was going into, quite purposely in an effort so that I wouldn't be present. So we can see that it's something that we're doing that we can refrain from, and that, it's important to refrain from because those states are taking us from what we need to be able to do so that we can be happy. So another form, so working with the hindrances is extremely, the Buddha gave it a whole section in terms of a key mindfulness. It's really, as one of my teachers, Thanissaro Bhikkhu, would say, it's a preliminary form of insight where we begin to start to understand how the mind is deluding us from being in the present moment. And the main thing is to see the hindrances as hindrances. That's the insight. Along these lines, particularly in terms of the hindrance of restlessness, but a little bit more specific in terms of what the mind is doing that is preventing us from being present, or how we're taking ourselves out of the present moment, is to bring insight into the thinking in the meditation, right? So in order to really be able to settle the mind down to the point where we need to be able to settle the mind down so that we can develop strong concentration, we need to bring insight to our thinking in the meditation. So when I first learned meditation, I was told, just notice the thinking and come back to the breath. Notice the thinking and come back to the breath. Notice the thinking and come back to the breath. Notice that you're lost in thought, come back to the breath. That was great, but that's only going to take you so far. It's only going to take you so far. In order to really develop strong concentration, you need to begin to start questioning the thinking. This is the Buddha's teachings. You need to bring insight to the thinking. And as Thanissaro Bhikkhu would say, the basic question, it's a simple form of bringing insight. You're not digging so deeply necessarily, but it's a simple question, or some form of the simple question: is this useful? Is this thinking serving me? Is this thinking in my best interests? Is this thinking, an expression of compassion for myself? The heart knows the answer to those questions. People always say, well, I know it's not useful, but the mind thinks the thinking is useful. Maybe you're thinking about something that you have to do, or a place that you have to go, or an appointment, or you're thinking about the state of the world or the state of your life, and it seems like really important in the moment, right? So you need to start to question your thinking. Most people go through their whole life and they just think, and they never question their thinking, and they're never present. So in order to be present, you have to start questioning what you're doing that's taking you out of the present moment. You have to start bringing insight to your thinking. So again, this simple question: is it useful? Is it useful? Is this questioning useful? What you're doing when you start asking, you may ask the question and, not much seems to be happening, but if you keep asking and keep asking and keep asking with love, and it's a question that you're asking with love and with compassion, gradually you develop what's called disenchantment with the thinking. Gradually, that thinking starts to arise, and you see it and you question it, or even before you start to question it, you go, no, I don't want to go into that thinking because I've questioned it, I've looked, I've seen, and I understand that it's not useful. Once I started doing this in my meditation, my concentration got so much stronger. I mean, it was really startling to me because I had just been, there's thoughts, that's fine, let me come back. Now, those thoughts are taking me out of the present moment. They're preventing me from doing what I need to do so that I can have a greater happiness in this life. So there's this quality of ardency that we have to develop that's informed. Ardency is this quality of effort. No, I'm not going to go into that thought. It's that quality of effort that's informed by wisdom and compassion. I'm not going to go there. The Thai Ajahns would say that's dangerous. It's a dangerous place for me to go into that thinking. So we start to develop insight into thinking. This is how we develop concentration. As the mind starts to settle down into the present moment, see that the hindrances in a lot of the discursive thinking, or some of this thinking anyway, is really about taking you out of being present, because we don't want to be present because of, like I said before, there's different emotions, there's different feelings that make being in the present moment, it's painful. So as the mind settles down into the present moment, and as we start to get more present, we have to start to bring insight into why it is that we don't want to be present. So what does that mean? We start to see what's going on in terms of our present moment experience that's painful, and we start to bring some awareness to that. So, the mind might start to settle down in your meditation. You've kind of moved through the hindrances a little bit, and you're starting to stay with the breath. And I talked about this in the sitting tonight, and you're starting to stay with the breath a little bit more. And then you start to feel like, man, I don't really want to do this anymore. Sometimes people even just get up, it's like, this is enough, or we're struggling through the meditation. It's so hard, right? Well, why is it hard? Why don't I want to do this anymore? That's the insight. Typically for me, what happens is, I'll get into the meditation and I'll start to get more present. And then it's like, oh man, and I'll usually stick it out, but it's like, I'm at odds with my experience in the meditation. I'm at odds with my experience in the meditation. Could be your physical experience of the body. And if that's the case, you have to look at that. More often than not, there's something going on in terms of your experience of the present moment that is emotional, mental, and you're feeling it in the body, some kind of agitation. For me, it's usually some kind of an anxiety that I'm feeling. And, I could sit there and kind of struggle through the meditation. And if I do that, of course, my concentration isn't going to develop so strong. Or I can start to bring some attention to what's there. So we start to see, as we settle down in the present moment, that we're ill at ease. We're ill at ease. There's some kind of an uncomfortable emotional quality, some kind of dis-ease, if you will, some kind of agitation. For me, again, it's usually some kind of anxiety. So just bring attention, your awareness to that. So you say, oh, there's anxiety, there's agitation. And we start to bring some attention to that as a felt sense in the body. And it's, the practice of insight can be really simple. Just bring your awareness to it. Your awareness understands the experience. When you're aware of that experience of anxiety, just like in this sitting tonight, we got down into I got into a nice concentration, but sure enough, there was a little bit of anxiety there. All right, I brought some awareness to that. When you bring awareness to your experience, there's a little bit of space, so you start to unhook from it. You're not clinging so much to it. There's a little bit of space. You start to see that there's a potential for just letting it be, and concentration develops. Concentration. So once I brought attention to that anxiety in the meditation, and this is kind of into the meditation, my concentration, boom, just went that much stronger because I started to pay attention to what was in my experience that I was at odds with. I always like the way Thanissaro Bhikkhu talks about this. He says, start to develop present moment awareness, get your concentration going, and then see what's interrupting the silence and the stillness. What's going on here? Oh, there's some anxiety, there's some agitation, there's some fear, whatever. And start to bring awareness to that. Start to get a little bit of space from what's there and the way that you're holding on to what's there. And concentration develops. Concentration develops. So the last part that I'll talk about in terms of insight in developing concentration is really in many ways the most primary form of insight that we're using in developing concentration, which is developing the breath, right? So, the first step of the breath meditation is to be mindful of the breath. The second stage is to see what the breath is like. So this is really in the Buddha's design in terms of insight. The first insight, what's the quality of the breath like? Is there dis-ease in the breath? Is there ease in the breath? It's the first movement of seeing, is there suffering or is there an alleviation of suffering? So this is really the first form of discernment in concentration practice, is seeing what the breath is like. You're developing the ability to practice discernment. If you can develop this discernment into what the breath is like, you can develop discernment into all the different forms of dis-ease in the mind and heart. So, this is such a crucial part of the practice. The way the Buddha teaches it is to develop this insight into what the breath feels like. And once we are able to see the dis-ease in the breath, we're able to cultivate an easeful breath. And then the third step in the breath meditation is bringing your awareness to the full body and seeing what the body is like and cultivating that easeful abiding in the body. Seeing what the breath is like, seeing what the body is like as a form of discernment, seeing what ease feels like, cultivating that quality of ease is using discernment to develop concentration. So what we're doing is we're using our powers of discernment to evaluate the breath in the body and cultivate an experience of the breath in the body, an experience of the present moment that's easeful and pleasurable, so the mind will stay there. Ultimately, we use these powers of discernment that we have, we use insight to shape our experience of the present moment so the mind is content to remain in the present moment. And that's how you develop jhana. You get to the level of being able to develop jhana when you develop and shape an experience of the present moment by using your powers of insight in the way that I've described them, so the mind is content to stay here. It's like, feels pretty good. I don't need to be outside of the realm of this experience of breath and body in this moment, because it's pleasurable. It feels good. I've put aside some of the pain and I've gotten a little bit of space and understanding into that, and I'm able to cultivate this easeful and pleasurable abiding in the present moment. And from there, that's when concentration becomes developed. Now, when concentration becomes developed to this level, then it leads to liberating insight. Liberating insight. So again, it's very important to understand that the Buddhist concentration is a very specific kind of concentration known as jhana. So jhana includes the ability to be able to focus first on the breath and then the body, but it also includes, by definition, the Buddhist definition, it includes an easeful flow of energy throughout the body, a quality of pleasure, sukha, which is actually a mental quality, and contentedness, tranquility. So these qualities of ease and pleasure are integral to the Buddha's concentration. The quality of jhana and the quality of ease and pleasure is felt throughout the body. So the Buddha's concentration includes, and this is critical, this maybe is the most critical point in this whole talk, the Buddha's concentration includes a full body awareness. Includes full body awareness. Thanissaro Bhikkhu, who again has been my teacher for a number of years, who's pretty much he's a Buddhist scholar. He knows the texts, and he says there's no place in the texts where the Buddha mentions concentration where he doesn't indicate that it includes a full body awareness. So, this development of full body, and I see seen this for myself, how in order to be able to maintain an abiding in the present moment, there needs to be a quality of ease and well-being in the body. And in order for there to be insight, there needs to be a full body awareness. So when you develop a concentration that includes these qualities, including a full body awareness, insight can develop. Insight can develop, but there needs to be this awareness of the full body, a sensitivity to the full body. So concentration, as it develops, leads to the ability to develop liberating insight. So liberating insight is insight into the Four Noble Truths. So, when we're developing insight into the Four Noble Truths, we see that we're suffering, we're at odds. I just described before being at odds with the anxiety or whatever. We're at odds with our experience. And, we're holding on to something, right? We're holding on to some form of some mental form, if it's anxiety or fear or anger or disliking or liking. So there's a suffering. So insight into the Four Noble Truths is like we see that we're suffering and that our suffering is caused by something that we're doing. We're holding on. And this insight includes seeing and understanding that we don't have to hold on, that what we're holding on to doesn't have to be held on. And it includes beginning to start to see what it's like when we don't hold on. So that's, seeing things in terms of the Four Noble Truths. We're suffering, we're holding on. We start to understand that we don't have to hold on. Out of insight, that insight and understanding the pain in holding on and realizing that it's something that we don't have to do, we hold on less. We begin to start to see more and more what it's like when we don't hold on. So being able to see this suffering, if you will, this dissonance, this dis-ease, I like to think of it, sometimes we see that the heart is blocked. We're at odds with our human experience. We're out of tune. In order to see that we're out of tune, we have to be aware of that out of tunedness or that suffering as it manifests in the body as felt sensation. It's not intellectual. This isn't psychology. Psychology is great. I've done lots of therapy. A lot of the therapies that I've done in the past few years have included body awareness, but being able to see things in terms of the Four Noble Truths, in terms of being able to see your suffering means being able to be aware of it as felt sense in the body. So to know your experience in the body as a felt sense. It's not intellectual. It's not intellectual. The wisdom that we gain by knowing our experience as it manifests as suffering and holding on, and then the letting go of the holding on and what it's like when we're not holding on, is something that we know experientially on a felt level. That's what wisdom is in the Buddhist teaching. So you have to have that full body awareness to know that. Something that you experience by looking at what's happening in the body as a felt sense. It's kind of like music, right? Music is a good analogy. It's like, try to describe what music is. You can't know what music is because if somebody tells you what it sounds like. The only way that you know what music is you've got to hear it and experience it for yourself, right? So you can't understand your suffering by thinking about it. You can understand it on an intellectual level, but not on the transcendent, liberating level that we're asked to understand it in terms of being mindful of the Four Noble Truths within the confines of the Buddhist teachings, unless you know it as a felt experience in the body. So in order to develop, so I'm explaining why, because people say, well, yeah, I know I need concentration to develop insight. Well, why is that? See, we don't understand why you need concentration. You need concentration because you need jhana. You need the Buddha's concentration, and that includes a full body awareness. To truly understand your experience, you have to be able to have a felt sense of it in the body. You have to be able to have a felt sense of your suffering, the way that you're holding on, the pain in your holding on, You can understand that you don't have to hold on by seeing things in the body. Intellectually, the mind can't get its mind around that. It has no chance. And then you can begin to start to see what happens when you do let go. So, when you bring awareness to your experience in the body, if it's that feeling of anxiety or agitation, you can feel it in the body and you start to bring your awareness to it and you begin to start to see it for what it is. You're observing it and you begin to start to see what it's like when you're not holding on to it, the potential for not holding on to it. The Buddha's concentration, which is strong concentration in a full body awareness, includes pleasure. The quality of pleasure enables us to stay in the body, the mind, because the human mind inclines to pleasure, and the quality of pleasure in the body enables us to be with the suffering. It's not possible for us to be with our pain and suffering and to really know it if we're not able to do that from a place of strength. So if all we know is our pain, it's really not possible for us to be able to look at our experience that's painful. We want to get away from it. We want to get rid of it. We want to fix it. As long as you want to get away from it and want to try to fix it, you're not going to be able to look at it clearly enough and understand it by being with it with some space to really develop insight into it. It's like Thanissaro Bhikkhu said, most of us are desperate to get rid of our suffering because it's all we know. It's all we know. Once you develop a pleasurable abiding in the body, all right, there's pleasure, there's pain in the body, there's this feeling of anxiety that I feel in the body, there's this feeling of disappointment, there's this worry, there's this fear, but it's not all of my experience in the body. There's pleasure, there's ease, there's this quality of well-being. All right, let me look at this little bit of anxiety right here, and let's start to pay attention to that. Let me look at this anger that's here. Let me look at this disappointment, this dissatisfaction, this sadness. It's not all of my experience. I can look at it, I can pay attention to it, and I can begin to start to know it if there's a quality of pleasure. The quality of this quality of concentration really culminates in this ability to have equanimity, to be with our experience without wanting to get rid of it. There's a quality of acceptance and a quality of space. So we're just able to observe. We're just able to observe our experience. The Buddha says, when there's concentration, we're able to look at our experience like one person looking at another person, or a person who's standing looking at a person sitting in a chair, or a person who's sitting in a chair looking at a person who's lying on the floor. Just as if one person were to reflect on another, or a standing person were to reflect on a sitting person, or a sitting person were to reflect on a person lying down, even so, monks, the monk has his theme of reflection well in hand, well attended to, well pondered, well tuned by means of discernment. And he says this is what happens when there's concentration. So there's a quality of duality, There's, all right, ease and pleasure, there's the breath, and then there's the pain. And I can look at the pain and I can begin to understand it by observing it. So we can bring our awareness to it. We can bring our awareness to this experience that we had that's there in the body. And, to a large extent, what we're just asked to do is just let there be awareness. Just let there be awareness of this experience. If there's real clear seeing, awareness understands the experience. So we just pay attention to the experience and we see, okay, this is the experience of anxiety, of fear, of desire, of wanting, of dissatisfaction. This is what it's like when I'm holding on to it. This is what it's like, when there's a little bit of awareness, then there's some space there and we're not holding on to it. We begin to start to understand, oh, that's what it's like when I don't hold on to it. I don't have to hold on to it. I can get a little bit of space. There's peace there. When there's concentration, awareness is informed by wisdom. So, the Tayajans say, the citta, the place of wisdom is right here in the body. it's right here in the body. You know, your place of wisdom, they say, is right here in the middle of the chest. When there's concentration, your awareness comes right out of here. It converges. Typically, our awareness is spread out, but when there's concentration, your awareness converges right here at the heart. So when you pay attention to an experience like anger or fear or desire, there's wisdom there. There's a quality of knowing. You know, the heart understands the experience in the way that the mind can't understand it. The heart understands that it's painful when you hold on and that you don't have to hold on. You know, the heart understands that that experience isn't who you are. It's not self. You know, it's arising out of conditions. But you already have that wisdom. That wisdom is already in the heart. It's your concentration that's going to enable you to be able to develop this quality of awareness that comes straight from the heart. The Buddha said, when you have that, insight happens like that. He says it's like there being a big jar filled with water and a strong person comes over and knocks it over. That's how easily insight happens. When there's concentration, your awareness is informed by wisdom and you understand your experience. You understand that you don't have to hold on to these different mental qualities that we're holding on to and these different stories and these different ideas that we have about ourselves and the world. You know, we can let those things be, and that there's a freedom. And in that place of freedom, we know happiness in this life, and we can act from that place and live and make the most of our lives. So that's enough for now. Thank you guys so much for your attention. I'll ring the bell and we can take some time for questions.